Rishi Sunak has pushed back the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 5 years to 2035. This move comes only 3 years after pushing it back another 5 years to 2030. This move has opened questions about the UK's commitment to net zero targets and has also raised major questions about the effects to the British motor industry. So today on the NewsBite, we talk to University Conservative Association and the Green Party Society to talk about what they think of this move. This is your NewsBite presented by your independent student media, X Media.
Announcing today that we're going to ease the transition to electric vehicles. You'll still be able to buy petrol and diesel cars and vans until 2035. Even after that, you'll still be able to buy and sell them second-hand.
Thanks for joining us here in the Express FM studio. Tom Richardson, the president of the Exeter University Green Party. Gracie's got some questions for you.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you. So, to get started, do you think it's fair for electric cars to be double the price of the normal ones?
I certainly don't think it is fair. And, what we've seen with a lot of technological innovations is that the price eventually does drop down. And certainly this is something that is important for the revolution or the change to mass electric car usage in the UK. I do think that it is disappointing that we have seen the pushback to 2035 instead of 2030 for the banning of petrol and diesel cars. I do understand that there is, still issues with pricing. And that is certainly something that I would like to see the government providing more subsidies and more help. But clearly, as we've seen over the last few days, that does not seem to be the policy of the current government.
Yeah, good stuff. So do you think if we do ban petrol cars, do you think that the charging networks are ready for that?
So, originally the deadline was 2030, right? It's 2023 right now. If I was to say this today, like I am, I would say no. We are still unprepared for the complete rollout. We do have, originally we had 7 more years to meet that deadline, and I did believe that a change of government probably would help in the speeding up of the rollout of electric charging infrastructure. However, although some might say that extending the deadline for 5 years might help the case of increasing the availability of this infrastructure, I do think that at the end of the day it is a regressive policy, and more should have been done by the current government instead of pushing the deadline back, rather to actually accelerate the rollout and meet demand.
Very interesting. So do you think that electric cars should actually be a political issue?
I think that's a good question. Now, most people would agree to say that we should, it should be our own choice what kind of type of car we have. And I know that, we do have the policy eventually coming in about the banning of new petrol and diesel cars. You see, I think this is necessary and it's essential to ensure that, transportation is one of the most carbon emitting industries in the world. And without addressing this change, then dealing with the climate crisis is certainly going to be almost impossible. And so I do think it is necessary to ensure our future generations are protected, and we do as much as we can to do that. I think there is still a reluctance to sort of change to an electric car, but I do believe that an increase in infrastructure, which, like I said, in the previous question, is essential to make sure the rollout is successful. I do think when that does come to play, then again it will kind of be like a tipping point, and people start to realise that actually it is a feasible option. But again, I come back to this point. It's just extremely disappointing that this was the mentality of the current government, to switch away from trying to meet those targets, the net zero targets and the transition targets, to completely regressing and just rolling the ball down the road kind of thing. So yeah.
And lastly, do you think that the government back green policies?
Certainly not. I do not think that this current government is backing green policies. It is completely inadequate, in my opinion. Obviously the announcement a few days ago of the changes to the net zero policy, it's extremely disappointing. Obviously we had the changes in the policy with boilers and insulation. Those two things, just for a start, it's just going to cost households even more, and it's literally just to protect landlords, for them not having to pay out money to try and insulate people's homes more or improve the efficiency of their boiler. That's just something to protect landlords. It does not have climate change at its focal point of interest. Of course, we've already discussed the 5-year extension to the deadline of the banning of petrol and diesel cars, which again is extremely regressive. Now, I am deeply concerned that this current government's outlook does not have climate issues at its forefront. And I think, though Sunak may believe that this is what it takes for the Conservatives to win the next election, it's playing with fire. At the end of the day, we are the generation who are going to have to deal with the decisions made by the current government. And I'm extremely, almost scared, in fact, of what we're going to have to pick up when eventually we sort of come to the position of trying to change things for ourselves.
Powerful words there, Tom. Thank you for joining us here for NewsBite. And of course, all the best as well to the Green Party, the next big thing in the political scene in Exeter. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today, Jack, from UCA. And thanks for giving us the other side of the story, as we've just heard from the Green Party.
Yeah, of course, Joe. It's great to come on and talk on behalf of ordinary working people about cars. It's a great topic.
So, Jack, in 2021, Boris Johnson said the world was at 1 minute to midnight to prevent climate catastrophe and urged that we need to act now. Does this still stand in the Conservative Party of 2023?
Well, certainly Boris Johnson doesn't still stand in the Conservative Party in 2023, Harry, as I'm sure you're aware. You're a very intelligent man. Look, climate is incredibly important. We're talking here as a panel of young students on student radio, which I think is, and XTV as well, which I think is a wonderful thing. And climate is going to be one of the big issues of our generation. But how does that look? It does not look, in my opinion, with dramatic language that's going to scare people. I don't think that's productive. I always talk about educating but not scaring people. And what it also doesn't look like is misinformation. And frankly, it is misinformation to suggest that the Sunak administration, which is doing a great job, by the way, is not committed to the climate targets. No, that we are not pushing back on our 2050 net zero target. What we are doing is being pragmatic, which, by the way, I think is a great thing to do, and talking honestly. And I will say, in a way that I don't think people of either colour prior to Sunak have in the Conservative or Labour Party, talking honestly about how we're going to get to that net zero target. We can't lie to working class families and tell them they don't have to give up things that they will. I didn't hear your Green Party interview, but I'm sure there was a load of rubbish about that we wouldn't have to cut meat, we wouldn't have to cut flying, we wouldn't have to cut cars, all absolute rubbish. If we were going to achieve the target where they wanted, which by the way was even before 2030, we'd have had to do that. We're having a real conversation with real people.
Okay, on a similar note, you've raised some of those ideas about eating meat, and I think one of the policy reversals announced by Sunak was the not having 7 recycling bins and things along that vein, which were never actually policy on a national level or even in many cases local level anyway. Is this anything more than an attempt by Sunak to shore up the Tory core vote with culture wars, or is it more? Is there any grounding for these sort of policies that were reversals that were announced?
I know the media love that term, Harry, culture wars, because it's meant to reference all the things that the establishment don't think are relevant topics to talk about. Well, let's talk about what's not culture wars. It's not culture wars to say we should protect ordinary farmers. We should make sure that they have access to produce their meat, to be able to get that out and raise a living for themselves. Down here, we're in Devon. We should talk about our great farmers that we have across the Devon County. I have family who have worked for over 50 years on farms in rural East Devon. They need to have their livelihood protected. They can't just go on strike as some workers up in the cities do. We need to protect them. That's what that policy is doing. I don't think it's culture wars. As to the point of it's just gimmicks and it's not actually something that matters, I think it does matter. I think it's true to say that what the Sunak administration is doing with the sort of 7 bins and the meat, maybe that's not the number one staple policy that the media have been talking about, but it is important. It's important to talk in real terms to people that some of what we were pushing, whether it was something we were already doing, whether it's something that people wanted to do, let's remember again, you've had the Green Party on the other side in their 2019 manifesto, they ran on an agenda agenda to introduce a meat tax. Then he ran on an agenda to introduce a flying tax. That's the sort of stuff people on the other side, the establishment side of this argument, are arguing for. And ordinary people are saying, that's not going to work. We need a sensible, pragmatic solution. We need a common sense agenda, which is going to put ordinary people first. It's going to put meat production, which is an incredibly important part of our farming communities, first. And it's going to put actually allowing ordinary people to fly. That's why we also saw a U-turn from the Sunak administration on trying to stop people from being able to fly once a year to go on holiday. I think holiday is an incredibly important thing that people save up to do.
If I could just jump in there, and excuse me for jumping in, I'm going to cut back.
Your pardon, Joe, don't worry.
I'm going to cut back to actually what we spoke about a lot on the Green Party, which was transport policies and car policies. Do you think it is fair to, let's say, British motor industry, that they've been planning for so long for this 2030 target, and now the rug's been pulled underneath them?
I think the British motor industry will agree with me on a couple of things. They'll agree with me that, firstly, that these targets are always going to be difficult to achieve. They'll agree with me that electric vehicles don't have a long enough life and are too expensive for ordinary British people to buy at the moment. And they'll also agree with me that certainly it's not the Green Party and the Labour Party that are on the side of car policy, car owners. When we look at their policies on low traffic neighbourhoods, on ULEZ expansions, it definitely is not the other side of this debate that is on the side of ordinary working people and on the side of car owners. So I loved the interjection, Joe, but I'm just not sure it stands up to scrutiny.
With respect, Jack, the Tories have claimed throughout their time in office to be the party of business. Yet we've seen these changes and these U-turns that were announced in recent weeks have been met with significant criticism from business, including car companies like Ford, who have stated that the reason they wanted to push ahead with the UK's 2030 target is because it was seemingly so more ambitious than other countries that it gave us a competitive advantage. Does this U-turn risk alienating business leaders from the Conservative Party?
Well, I always love a case study, Harry. It's a bit like a poll. For every case study you find, I'll give you another one. So yes, Ford have come out very critically. Toyota have actually been quite supportive of the policy. So it really does depend on which car companies you want to dabble. Now, I'll put my Toyota against your Ford any day of the week. But frankly, the honest answer is that business leaders are divided. There are some who are supportive, there are some that are not. But what I think business leaders will respect is a Sunak administration that is suffering in the polls, that may not win the next election. I hope he does, but it's a serious concern at the moment for the Conservatives, which hasn't been the case for a while, actually. But what we are sensing is he is having the honest conversations with businesses now. So he's saying, I've got into power and I've seen this policy that's been in place for ages and it's not working. We're not going to achieve in a proportional, sensible and mature adult-like way. We're not going to achieve this target. So I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think we're going to get there. I'm going to tell you when I think we can actually get there. And that's the kind of grown-up leadership that I think on both sides of the aisle we've been screaming for years. And it's the kind of grown-up leadership I only think you get with a Sunak administration.
Isn't there a risk, though, that it's becoming a lack of ambition from the government, that they're not pushing ahead with more ambitious targets? That, yes, there was a chance we wouldn't meet the 2030 target, and very realistic chance, but actually, was it not better to push ahead with something more ambitious rather than just retreating into a more relaxed 2035 that will make it harder for us to achieve net zero by 2050?
Let me talk to you about ambition, Mr. Craig, and what I think is ambitious in this country. I think it's ambitious to say we think we're going to be the first country to get to the net zero target that we want. We've already cut carbon by 68% since we started. That's the highest level of any developed economic country in the world. But also, ambition comes in many different ways. I think it's ambitious to say we're going to bring working class people with us when we achieve this target. So we're not the Julia Hartley Brewers of the world. We're not against the net zero targets, but we are going to bring working people with us. We're not going to alienate them. At a time where on both sides of the spectrum, working class people are feeling alienated by politics, it is only Rishi Sunak's government who are standing up and saying they're going to try and bring people with us. They're going to try and do it in a pragmatic and proportional way. If that's not ambitious, then by God, I don't really know what is.
So it's interesting you've raised ideas about the electorate and working class people in particular and what they support now. The UK public does remain broadly supportive of net zero policies. A poll in August suggested 73% of Tory voters support the pledge, and within that, a majority of voters support things like ULEZ and other policies. So why has Sunak chosen to U-turn on something that is seemingly so popular with the electorate?
Well, you've just had a little contradiction there, Harry. I don't know if you picked up on it in your sentence, because you said that the public supported net zero, and then you suggested that Sunak has U-turned. Sunak has not U-turned on net zero.
I haven't said I said that the public support net zero pledge, and they also support the implementation of policies such as ULEZ, such as the ban on petrol and diesel by new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. The public generally, according to most polls carried out, support the policies that are needed to obtain, that are now being U-turned on, that are necessary to obtain that net zero
Well, I
target.
haven't seen these Guardian polls. I do agree with you.
I think it's a bit rich to describe YouGov, which is owned by Nadine Sahawi, as a Guardian poll.
It's certainly true. It's certainly true that the public supports the net zero 2050 pledge, and anybody that's claiming that's not the case is not true. But if you're going to try and claim that the public overwhelmingly supports opposes what Sunak has done here, I think you're going to need to demonstrate some actual polls to prove that. Let's talk about what I think the public thinks. I think the public in Uxbridge and South Rise that rejected the ULEZ policy, I think the Labour Party's in a mess about it, and I'd love to know where Sir Softy stands at the moment as to whether he's for or against that. But let's also more generally talk about, you say that the public is not with what Sunak is doing. I think the public wants to achieve net zero, but I think it wants to do it in a proportional and sensible way. I'm never a big believer that polls always resonate with where the public stands. I don't think they're always reflective. And I would put to you that when I get out on the doorsteps in areas like North Devon, where I work, very rural working class constituency, that people are not supportive of policies that are frankly anti-car. I know that the presenters of Sky News will try and tell Kemi Badenoch that ordinary people don't drive cars, but let me tell you, by God, they do. They need cars, and the Sunak administration is the only administration that's realised the need for car owners to keep their cars.
Well, that is a hell of an interview. Thanks, Jack. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
You know what? I have to give you one thing, Jack, and that you back questions away incredibly well. So you know what?
England should employ me then to play cricket. They're not doing very well in their T20 warm-ups at the moment.
Honestly, Jack may as well opening batsman for the English team. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.